There we go. So I'm glad to be here with you folks today, and we've got two presentations back to back here. First, I'm going to spend a little time talking with you all, kind of a high-level overview of the fire department, some of the issues that we're facing, and a little bit of a historical background about where we've come from over the last many years. And I'm sad to see that Nan left because I've got a slide that she'd probably like to see here in a minute. But and then after I'm done with my presentation, Cliff Free is going to jump on and do a presentation specifically about our EMS portion of the fire department. And I would ask if members of council would hold their questions to the end, and then I will address questions that council may have about my presentation. Then Cliff will do his and have a separate question and answer session as well. So I want to start off, first of all, by just talking about who are we? What's the makeup of our department? We currently have 59 personnel, and that's total staff, 59 FTEs. We have 36 of our staff are firefighter paramedics. We have 16 EMT firefighters. We have 3 in administration and 4 down in the fire marshal's office. We are and I know that everybody knows this, but we are the only fire department in Clark County that provides ambulance response and transport. We have what are recognized by a lot of authorities as the highest trained and most proficient staff in the region. And that's due to the work of Dr. Whitwer and the training he provides, and also in Cliff Free and the ongoing training that he provides our staff. It wasn't that many years ago that, maybe Cliff will talk about this later if he remembers, is that it wasn't that many years ago that we were recognized nationally as one of the safest communities in the country to suffer a cardiac arrest because we had such a good cardiac arrest survival rate in our city. And that's pretty darn amazing. And that's due to the hard work of our staff, the dedication, and all the training they go through. I wanted to talk about a little bit where we came from in just 30 years. And it's interesting to see how much our community's changed and how much our department's changed. In 1991, we had just 15 paid firefighters. 7 of them were firefighters, 8 were paramedics. We had 3 officers. We had 1 station and just a little over 1,500 calls annually. And look at the population. We were 6,442. And then in green, you see next to that, I just wanted to contrast how much has changed in 30 years. We now have 52 frontline firefighters. Of course, we have 3 stations after the merger with Washougal. We're getting close to 5,000 calls a year, and a population that's inching over 25,000. And you know, I think it's in 2035, we're estimated to have a population of some 35,000. And so this community, we all know, is growing tremendously, very fast. And addressing that growth from the stance of public safeties, going to require a close examination of our organization by not only this group, but myself, people in administration, and also in concert with the labor group leadership as well. It's interesting to look at the names on this photo here. There's only 4 of those people that are still working for us. Everybody else has retired and moved on. Next, I want to talk a little bit about our mission statement. Now, one of the things that the master plan talked about that you folks will recall was that they said that we needed to have a re-emphasis on our mission statement, to use it more, to refer to it more, to make sure it's used more in our documents that we put out there, more in our discussions, and referenced as far as the department that we want to be. This statement was made, and I'll look to Greg, although I don't see Greg. I know Greg recognizes this because this mission statement was put together through a joint collaborative council and labor partnership, I think almost 20 years ago. And I know Greg was on that committee, and so was Lloyd Halverson, and some of our union leadership from that time worked together to put this mission statement together. And What's interesting is one of the initiatives that we're doing internally at the department right now is we formed a steering committee that meets internally, that we're trying to find common ground in forming a direction and goals as we move forward in the organization. And in our first meeting, one of the things we talked about was this mission statement, because it was brought up in the master planning process. And it was interesting to see our group feels that this mission statement, despite how old it is still relevant, still valid. And there are some things that we don't do as well as we should, but having this document and referring to it more gives us something to aspire to. And I think that's really good. And I'll go over it briefly with you. Our mission statement is to provide the highest quality service to our community through the protection and preservation of life and property. And then it goes on to list our values: to serve our community's needs through excellence, courtesy, equality, and respect, professionalism, readiness, education, training, competency, and accountability, integrity, dependability, trust, and honesty, and then finally pride, having enthusiasm, optimism, and recognition. And even though our group feels that this is still a very valid statement, we recognize too that these are things that maybe we need to look at, that there's updates that need to be done, ways to improve it. But in the meantime, we definitely have the initiative to start using our mission statement and referring to our value statement more as far as the department we want to be and the people we want to be. So next, I'd like to talk a little bit about where I see this department going. As the fire chief, what I think are some of the most important things that we have coming up in front of us, and what my vision is for the agency. And it's pretty simple, actually. I think there are three major points that are in my vision that we need to focus on. We have to have sufficient staffing for safety and to maintain our level of service. We have to have updated equipment, and that includes apparatus and rescue gear. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the presentation. And we have to have those first two things: the sufficient staffing and the updated equipment, the apparatus and the rescue gear to meet the needs of our community. And it's not only the needs of our community now, but the needs of our community as it grows as well. And this also is important to keep our own staff safe as well, not just level of service. In talking with my staff internally, just in individual discussions and in our steering committee, I believe for most of them, these are some of the most important things they see for this agency as well, particularly with staffing and apparatus. And but to do that, the third point that we need to touch on, to be able to do those things, we have to have a stable funding mechanism. And I think that's what is the biggest concern for me right now. And I know it is for a lot of folks on council. For the past 7 years, we've been in a merger with Washougal, and we've continued to face issues with the cost sharing formula in the partnership, and that was referenced by Novak, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in my presentation as well. And it's not only led to friction in our partnership, but quite honestly, it's threatened the very existence of it at times. It's made it really difficult to fund improvements in the organization, and that in turn has contributed decreased morale within the agency. If people are worried about perhaps they may not be a combined department anymore, there may be loss of jobs. So whether we seek to reform this partnership in a different way, we've talked about things like RFA and annexations and other methods like that, or whether it's just restructuring the ILA, we have to stabilize the funding mechanism of this partnership, or we're not going to be able to fund the changes that are needed to improve it and to address the growth that we're dealing with. We're not going to accomplish our vision and goals. And to get to this point, this is going to be a big topic for us in the upcoming year. We are going to have to work together, not only as an administration, but with this group, with this council, to figure out the best ways that we're going to be able to stabilize this funding mechanism as we move forward, because time is of the essence. I know several council members have expressed frustration with the current partnership and in trying to find a way to pay for all the things that the agency needs. So how do we get there? And, we're fortunate that in 2019, we had the ESCI conducted the master plan, which was a document that was a long time in the making and was really critical for us. And I was happy to see Novak reference that they felt that was a valid document. But of course, they also mentioned, as we all know, that there are a lot of things in that document that cost money. And those are conversations that we need to have with this group, with this city council group, with the city leadership. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of the master plan today, of course. We've done some high-level views of it previously, and we don't have the time to go through every single thing today. There are some parts of it that are in progress. There are some parts of it that are in planning. Some parts of it we're going to talk about in labor negotiations. But what I want to touch on for you today is just the top recommendations from the master plan that I think, if adopted by this group, would offer the best opportunity to change this department, to advance this department, to be transformative for this department. So those are the things that I'm going to touch on for you in the next slide. And these come directly from the master plan report itself. There it is. First, ESCI recommended adding the necessary staffing to eliminate cross-staffing at Station 42. And this is a topic of conversation we've had quite a bit lately. And for the benefit of some who may not have heard me talk about this before, just a quick overview of cross-staffing. Cross-staffing occurs when you don't have enough personnel at a station to staff both an ambulance and a fire engine. And so at Station 42, we typically only have 2 people here. And so the crew has to they decide whether to take an ambulance or a fire engine, depending on the call that comes in. Now, cross-staffing can be efficient at a short-term basis where you have limited staffing and perhaps low call volume, and staff can make the determination which vehicle to jump on, and it allows them to do more things with less. But we've been cross-staffing Station 42 for 20 plus years since the station was built. And ESCI recommends, and it's definitely been one of my strong initiatives, that we need to take the necessary steps to finally eliminating the cross-staffing here at Station 42. We have currently, due to Council's vision and initiative in 2019, Council agreed to add 4 positions. 4 frontline positions. 1 went to the fire marshal's office. Council agreed to add 4 positions in 2019, and Council has agreed to add 4 more positions in 21 and 22. And the reason I bring that up is because the master plan notes that they estimate it would take approximately 8 additional FTEs to end cross-staffing at Station 42. Well, 4 of those were already hired in 2019. So we have 4 more on the horizon that will get us very close to where we need to be. Now, it'll probably require some other conversations internally and through labor negotiations about the ways to make those 8 people most efficient at ending cross-staffing. But as far as the master plan recommendations, we're halfway there as far as cross-staffing at Station 42. So I do want to thank Council for not only agreeing to add those positions in 19, but agreeing to add 4 more in 21 and 22. That will help this department and this agency out tremendously in addressing one of the biggest issues that I've seen for many years here. The master plan also recommends establishing 3-person engine companies. The minimum standard for the nation is at least 3-person engine companies. There are some larger departments, and it's in NFPA to actually, ideally they like 4-person engine companies, but that's usually only seen in big metro areas. So why do we need 3-person engine companies? It provides us the bare minimum staffing to be able to handle fires that involve rescue, and it keeps our personnel safe. And as we know from the fire we had a few years ago on Valentine's Day, where the crews went in and effected a rescue with 2 people, which was not within the L&I rules, and we did receive a fine for that. And it's not just about avoiding fines, it's about keeping our personnel safe as well. Now, we do have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we all know that we're a transporting agency. And so sometimes we do have an ambulance available to respond with an engine on a fire as well. And then you might have 4 people pretty quickly on a fire. However, keep in mind that our call volume as such is so skewed to EMS that a lot of times those ambulances are out on medical runs. And so that's what happened. That was one of the contributing factors with that fire on Valentine's Day, was they were on their own. And so, if everybody's in the house and all the ambulances are here and all the engines are here, we can do okay as far as response to a structure fire. But ensuring that we have 3-person engine companies would keep us that much safer, and would also avoid problems like we had a few years ago with the Valentine's Day fire. Now, the master plan, and I also wanted to point out, currently Camas is the only agency outside of East County Fire and Rescue in Clark County that's not doing the 3-person engine company deployment. Now, this on the surface seems like a really heavy lift, because the master plan notes that they estimate it would take about 12 additional personnel. On top of the 8 to eliminate cross-staffing, they estimate another 12 to ensure 3-person engine companies. However, we don't think that it'll take near that. In discussions that we're having with the labor group and on possible different deployment models, it's possible that we could ensure 3-person engine companies with perhaps maybe 4 more people. So there's more discussion that needs to take place on that, and a lot of planning, but we think that it's possible to do it with a lot less than 12 people. We've got a plan for capital facilities replacement and expansion. As I mentioned earlier, and we all know this is a very fast-growing community, we've got a plan for the expansion of the public safety facilities in this community. The master plan recommends not only building 2 new stations to the areas north of Camas, north of Washougal, but also relocating our 2 existing stations. So that's 4 stations that they're recommending. And we're currently at capacity in 2 of our stations, as far as the inability to stuff any more equipment in them. And we're getting low on bed space in some of the stations too. And so the good thing about this particular initiative and this recommendation from the master plan is we are already taking a deep dive into this process as far as establishing a new capital facilities plan. And we are in the middle of choosing vendors. I'm going to talk about this a little more detail here in a little bit. But a big part of planning for these capital facilities replacements is updating that CFP. And we are in the middle of that process. And we've been meeting internally to try to figure out a vendor to help us assist us in creating that new capital facilities plan. And that's going to be the guiding document that helps us plan for our future needs. Now, the CFP process will, of course, be coming before council. That will not be approved or put into place without the involvement of this group. There will be public hearings. And so I just want to reassure council that as we prepare to create this CFP, you all will be very closely involved in this process. Next, we've got to develop and adopt a strategic plan. And that was a big one in the master planning process. Now, the master plan basically gives us the roadmap for where we need to be. The strategic plan tells us how we're going to get there. In that formal plan, we're probably going to need to eventually hire an outside help to put that together. It's a lengthy process. It often involves input not only from our elected officials, but members of the community and, of course, members of our own staff. When we get to that step, I think that this group will obviously be closely involved in putting together that strategic plan. Now, council's heard me say previously that it's going to be very difficult for us to put together a strategic plan if we don't know the status of our partnership with Washougal. And that's true. It makes it much more complex, but that doesn't mean that we can't start preparing to get to that point and hopefully as we're having these conversations behind the scenes about stabilizing our funding mechanism and our partnership, that will allow us to get started in the strategic planning process sooner. And I referenced earlier about our internal steering committee that we've put together. And one of the purposes of that is to sort of put together our own mini internal strategic plan that we use as a rough draft internally for knowing where we need to be and how we're going to get there. But I think that it won't be a formal strategic plan, but we can use that as a launching point when we get ready to get into the formal plan. And then finally, we've got to establish and fund an apparatus replacement plan. It impacts not only the level of service that we provide to the community, it impacts the safety of our staff. The plan is the easy part. And I think most of my staff are quite qualified to put together a document that lays out when we need to replace vehicles. But that's the easy part. The hard part is figuring out the funding and contributing in a regular manner annually, or however it's set up, to fund an apparatus replacement plan. So when it comes time to buy a new $650,000 engine or whatever, perhaps that money's already there. And we don't have to look at going out to bond or doing loans or something like that. And so the ILA, our partnership ILA with Washougal, has always called for the requirement to establish and fund an apparatus replacement plan. And we, for various reasons, we just haven't got there yet. And a big reason has been, referencing back to some of the struggles with our partner financially, concerns about whether they felt they could contribute to that apparatus replacement fund early on. So this is definitely something we need to revisit, because without a funded plan, we're going to continue to have difficulty replacing the apparatus that we need. As our community grows, we need to buy new ones and replace old ones. So, I mean, that's basically it, although it's not everything. But as I mentioned coming into this slide, these are the 5 items, I think, out of dozens of recommendations in the master plan. These are the 5 items that I strongly feel have the ability, if approved, to be completely transformative for this agency. We'd have a highly functioning staff, highly functioning, well-staffed, in modern facilities, housing modern equipment, that's ready at a moment's notice for when somebody calls 911. And I think that's what we all want. I think it's just the process of getting there. And I know that we're going to this group and myself and our staff are going to continue to have more conversations about the important aspects of the master plan, particularly these big 5 ones, because I think that they are the most important. So next, give me a second for a drink of water. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the status of our current partnerships and where we're at in them, as far as the progress of them, some of the challenges we're facing, and some of the initiatives that we have coming up involving them. Of course, our big one that we reference all the time is our merger ILA with the City of Washougal. We are in year 7 of a 10-year partnership with that. And this is the partnership that we probably spend the most of our focus and time on. As we all know, there's continued financial pressures on that partnership and the ability of our partner to continue to contribute to the staffing needs that the agency has. Jamal and David Scott are working very closely together on areas of the ILA, at least in the short term, that can perhaps be cleaned up and made better and make the cost sharing formula more equitable for both parties. And the discussion continues on that. There is currently a RFPQ that's going to be put out for the facilitated review of the partnership that we've talked about previously, and we should know more about that in the upcoming future. Novak talked about the restructure of the cost formula, and we're also looking at restructuring of the cost formula internally as well. Perhaps expanding it from right now we use AV, population and call volume, and we're looking at things like perhaps adding things like square footage, heated square footage, and square miles covered, and expanding what the formula looks at. And Novak I found Novak's recommendation really interesting. We'll touch on that in a little bit. We're continuing to work on our renewing or updating our capital facilities plan, and that work is ongoing. As I said a little bit ago, we're talking with vendors right now, trying to find somebody to assist us in pulling that together. Once that process starts, we anticipate it'll take about 2 to 3 months to complete that. And then that council will be involved in that, and you'll get all sorts of presentations and public hearings to look at that and have input into the capital facilities plan. And then once the capital facilities plan is put together, we can update our fire impact fees. And that's the other critical part, and they're linked, because we can't update our fire impact fees until our capital facilities plan is updated. And if we're not updating our capital facilities plan, we can't use some of the fire impact fees. So we don't want to leave money to the extent where it might have to be refunded at some point. And we certainly don't want to leave money on the table by charging lower fire impact fees than perhaps we could. Next, I'll talk about our EMS ILA with the city, well, not the city, but with East County Fire and Rescue, the fire district north of us. The partnership we've had with East County Fire and Rescue is our ambulance transport ILA. And since 1978, this document has been in place. It provides for the pass-through of East County Fire and Rescue's ambulance levy, their EMS levy. It's a straight pass-through to the city of Camas. And in exchange, we provide ambulance response and transport to their citizens. And that agreement has basically been unchanged since about 1978. The most recent 6-year agreement expired at the end of 2020. Council will recall that you approved, and the board of ECFR approved, extending that ILA by 1 year this time. And the reason that they wanted to extend it 1 year, not only did we get down to the wire where we were running out of time to pull a new one together, but they wanted to have more detailed discussion behind the scenes about perhaps revamping some of the language in that contract. They have maintained at times that they feel perhaps that the straight pass-through is not fair. They've questioned whether they should be retaining some of that money for themselves. We have had financial analysis done on that as far as the cost of providing service, and that will be a basis of the formal discussions that we have with them in the coming weeks. The requirement is that we put together a new ILA within the next 6 months, so between now and June. And this group, council, as well as JPAC, so our partners in Washougal have input, will be part of any change to that contract. So just rest assured that nothing will change in that contract as far as the cost share arrangement, or as far as the pass through, without this group being consulted. So you'll definitely have input into that process. And finally, I'm going to touch on the Novak Consulting Group and their recommendations for the fire department. There wasn't anything but particularly surprising in there for us. And definitely the first one they mentioned a little bit earlier was evaluating the CWFD cost allocation model. And I've repeated it many times already, and we know it's been a very difficult cost sharing model to keep together, and it's made it very hard to fund improvements in the department. And we've been looking at different ways that might be able to be restructured, not only between in conversations with Dave and Jamal, but also in looking at what Novak talked about. I thought it was really interesting. They referenced a department, I think it was North Shore, Wisconsin. And they said it was a department that had a similar merger arrangement as we do. And they had similar language as far as the metrics that were measured to establish the cost share. But what was interesting is that instead of using call volume, which we use, they use actually staff hours contributed to a particular city. And they said that was they felt was a more equitable way to calculate that staff time, as opposed to just counting calls, actually counting staff hours. And it's an intriguing thought. And perhaps in these conversations we're having with Washougal about perhaps restructuring the cost share formula, maybe that's something we'll want to look at and examine a little closer. And I believe North Shore's weighting was a little bit different too. So that's some of the things that we'll look at as we examine that more. Their next recommendation was enhancing the fire impact fee program in Camas, and the fire impact fee system we're in the middle of updating that as far as relation to the capital facilities plan. They're interrelated. And so that is in progress. And again, once that CFP is completed, or once the vendor starts work on that, we expect about 2 to 3 months, and then we'll have our new updated fire impact fees after this group approves that. An interesting note from the NOVAC recommendations on the fire impact fees is that they recommended that both cities form their own impact fee districts. And we've actually been talking about that in our working group behind the scenes. And so it sort of reinforces that idea that we've been talking about, because initially we approached this from the perspective of, we initially thought that we wanted to perhaps have the same fire impact fees in both cities. It would just be easier that way. But in conversations that we've had with our partners, we recognize that the way that we both approach growth between Camas and Washougal is very, very different. And it would make it extremely difficult to establish and agree on fire impact fees that were across both cities. So the idea that we could form separate fire impact fee districts, and the idea that NOVAC actually recommends doing that, I think is really good. And it reinforces the idea that we're going down the right path as we look at updating our fire impact fees. So that continues in process, or it's in progress. Their third recommendation for us was developing the service level target for existing inspections. And I won't spend a lot of time on this. Basically what they were saying from a high level is they felt that we needed to get out and do inspections of existing occupancies more. And we've recognized for quite a few years that was definitely a problem, because with the two staff that we had down there for so many years, Ron and Randy, our fire marshal and our deputy fire marshal, they had no time, or very little time, to do inspections of existing occupancies. They would focus on schools and high occupancy assembly areas, but most of their time was tied up on new construction. However, when council agreed to add another deputy fire marshal position to that office back in 2019, that has actually helped them start to be able to get a more rigorous inspection process and plan for existing occupancies. And that second deputy fire marshal is Kevin Bergstrom, and he's been, as he's attained the necessary certifications and training, he is taking on more and more of these existing occupancy inspections. So in talking with Fire Marshal Ron Schumacher about this recommendation, he felt that they are already very well on their way there to accomplishing it. So I just wanted to make sure council knew that. And then finally, NOVAC recommended developing a reoccurring pre-fire plan review process. And they talked about it in their presentation a little bit. A pre-plan is when we go out to certain occupancies in our area and we plan what an emergency might look like there. So if there's a fire in this particular business, where's our nearest hydrant going to be? Where are we going to make access? Where's the fire alarm panel? What are some of the unique challenges this building might have? Are there hazardous materials on scene, et cetera? NOVAC feels that we need to have a more vibrant pre-planned process. They said that the two big problems were, they said there was too much discretion in what people were going out and inspecting, and there was no schedule, a firm formal schedule on what was going to be done on what days and how often. And so I think this is very accomplishable, and I think that we can work on this internally as a command staff, and I think that that shouldn't be a heavy lift. It shouldn't require any additional money or anything. So I think with some planning of our officers group and seeing how best to unroll, or best to formalize that process, I think we can do that fairly easily. So those are the recommendations from the NOVAC consulting group. That's the entirety of my slides. I know there weren't a lot, and that was on purpose. I wanted to talk more than use slides. Let's see. With that, I'm going to take this off of, and I mentioned that Cliff has his own presentation on EMS, and we can take a few minutes here for council to ask questions you may have, or if you want to see Cliff's presentation and ask questions of the both of us after he's done, whatever your pleasure.
I have a couple questions, if I might. Is that okay?
Yeah.
My first question, and I just made some notes as you were reporting, Nick, and thank you. That was the most comprehensive and informative presentation in a good summary way that I've heard in a long time. So thank you and good job. My first question is what, and I'm not asking what the justification is, but what policy guides you in hiring paramedics versus EMTs? Do we have a policy or do we just do it?
Well, when we have a hiring process come up, we look at our current staffing as far as a balance of paramedics and making sure that we try to ideally have 2 paramedics on an ambulance. It's not always possible. And then we need to have paramedics on our engines as well. And so we have those conversations internally as a command staff before a vacancy is filled about whether a paramedic needs to be hired or an EMT. And one of the challenges that we have is that we have so many of our paramedics that become officers, and when we lose them to that officer rank, they're no longer on the ambulance, and so that increases the need to add paramedics, even though we might still have those positions there.
Okay, but back to my question: is there a formal policy? And the reason I ask the question is, and I'm not being critical, I'm just curious. This has budget impact, obviously, because paramedics are far more expensive, or significantly more expensive than EMTs. In 91, it was 7 to 8. And I understand that we've grown and all of that stuff. The ratio was 7 firefighter or EMTs to 8 paramedics. And now we're something like 50 to 18. So if we don't have a policy, I'm not even suggesting what that might be, but I would encourage administration to look at that with you. And maybe we could formalize a policy, because Nick, I know you inherited a practice that wasn't defined. It's been that way for a long time. I just think it would help us function more effectively and accountably. So that's my comment and suggestion to the administration.
Yeah. And to answer your question, Counselor, yeah, we do not have a formal written policy on the balance of paramedics. So that's something that we can definitely look at and have more internal conversation on.
And I know I don't have the authority as one council member to ask this, but I would be interested, if the others would join me or are interested, in seeing what a per capacity comparison using some cost metric to see what it costs us to provide fire service or fire and EMS service, let's include both, with other Washington cities our size or comparable demographics. I'd see some real value in that to help me explain to the public how things are working and why our costs are what they are. So again,
that's a really good idea.
Okay, thanks.
I agree.
You bear with me for a minute. Do we currently have a strategic plan?
We do not, no.
Okay, I'm not sure we do in other departments either, so I'm not going to be critical about that, but it comes at a time when we're facing all of these challenges, and I thought it was an appropriate question. Yep. And my final comment is, until we know where our partnership might end up with governance, it's really challenging to do that strategic plan, isn't it? Because, you know, I see for me, and you've heard me talk, and I think I've been joined by my peers, that one of our obligations to our citizens is to make sure there's some level of equity in what we pay for the services compared to our partners. Nick, I know you've heard it 100 times from me, but yet I still wonder, if we have a different form of governance, it may well end up being differently. So I don't see how we can do strategic planning until we know, at least have some idea or indication as to where that's going to be. So that's more of a comment, and I appreciate you giving me the chance to do that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Nick before we move on to Chief Free?
Looks like you're up, Cliff, and I'll still be here, Council, if you have some additional questions you think of for me after Cliff's presentation. Cliff, oh, there he is.
Okay, let me share my screen with you guys. Okay, Council, Mayor, I'd like to start this presentation with a quick look at the geography of the city of Camas. Then, taking a step back, open up the aperture in an effort to see Camas in the context of the greater East Clark County region, which is comprised of Camas, Washougal, and Eckford. Later, I will tie this into how the uniqueness of this geography necessitates a wider vision, one that extends beyond the boundaries of any one of the excuse me, any one of the service area's boundaries in terms of fire suppression, EMS, and transport services. My intention is to, at least at a very high level, develop a concept through the progression of slides. Along the way, there'll be lots of questions, but if it's at all possible, please hold those questions until the end. I think it would be a service to the wider vision that I am attempting to portray. I imagine, and I'm projecting a bit here, that this is how the council sees the city of Camas and their area of responsibility. It does not appear to be that much different than any other city in America. It has defined boundaries, and the city is responsible for fire and EMS protection within those boundaries. However, this egocentric vision of the role of the city of Camas is somewhat stunted, and the geography of the inhabited areas of East Clark County begs a wider scope of vision in terms of fire, EMS, and ambulance transport. When I add Washougal and East County Fire and Rescue to the map, we see what I am calling East, or defining as East Clark County. This currently comprises our ambulance response area. If we open the aperture wider yet, we see that East Clark County is essentially a dead-end street. It's a cul-de-sac, one step removed from being an island. We are hemmed, I'll get my cursor here. We are hemmed in by Livingston Mountain in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest to the north, up here. And if we were to imagine the Grinch stealing Christmas, it would be this direction from which he comes. To the east, we have Skamania County, which is very rural. The only resources available to us in Skamania County are in Stevenson, 23 miles to the east along Highway 14. And to the south, we are hemmed in by the waters of the Columbia River. It's geographically analogous to the human appendix. East Clark County has no avenues for mutual aid, ambulance transport, or additional assistance of any kind other than from the west, from Vancouver. And due to this geography, these resources must first pass through the response area of the city of Camas. The nature of this geography requires a more global vision of how to best serve East Clark County in terms of fire, EMS, and ambulance transport. And when you look at this, East County Fire and Rescue is facing a law of diminishing return. The constituents of East County all have Camas or Washougal addresses. As East County develops, as they get more value, the cities of Camas and Washougal move north and annex those areas. Eckford's resources over time are diminishing. On this slide, it illustrates access to East County and Washougal from the direction additional resources or a transport ambulance could possibly serve them. Of these, the only ingress that does not first pass through the city of Camas response area is Northeast 58th Street. That's this red arrow on the upper left. This is a 2-lane rural road that extends off 4th Plain and enters East County well north of the majority of its populated area. And it has no effectual access at all to the city of Washougal. All of the other accesses must pass through the city of Camas response area. These are demonstrated by these red arrows. Washougal is primarily accessed from Highway 14 and Evergreen Highway. East County is accessed from these same major thoroughfares branching north via Everett, Crown, Washougal River Road, 32nd, 39th, and Sunset View Road. And all of these are trunked from the cities of Camas and Washougal. Understanding the geography of East Clark County underscores the imperative of the city of Camas to maintain positive and functional relationships with both Washougal and East County. The city of Camas is essentially the gateway into both districts. Dissolution of these relationships would isolate and alienate both communities and significantly limit their response capabilities. In a lot of ways, East County and Washougal are fated to the decisions of Camas. So why do we transport? Well, Camas Ambulance Transport has been the glue that has held the entities of East Clark County together for 40 years. It's been the basis of our existing relationships with both entities, and it is currently working as it has for its duration, and it's working well. Camas Ambulance providing transport services is advantageous to all the citizens of East Clark County, while providing additive value specifically to the city of Camas. So what are those advantages? Well, the overarching MO of any EMS system should be to ensure and maximize quality of patient care. In this, first response fire-based ambulance transport has many advantages. And I gotta be careful here not to get too much into the weeds because I could talk at length about these, but there are a few points on here that I want to either remind existing council or educate the newer council members. As the ambulance transporting agency, we are able to maintain continuity of patient care from initial patient contact all the way through to the hospital by a single provider. From a patient perspective, having a single identifiable provider responsible and accountable for their entire care is indisputably preferable to that of being transferred from one agency to another, from one provider to another, from one person to another. Understand, civilians call 911 when their situation has escalated to a level above which they are able to control. They feel powerless and vulnerable, and having a single accountable provider gives them the assurance that someone is in control. Someone is piloting their ship. First response fire transport also allows for seamless integration of service, optimal teamwork. Our providers, both transport ambulance and first response medical, work within the same protocols, follow the same uniform departmental training, work with identical equipment, out of the same kits and apparatuses. We all have a working knowledge of all the equipment carried and where it is housed and where it can be found at every emergency. Because our providers work regularly on both the ambulance and the engine, we intimately understand the roles of each other on every scene. This ties into skill maintenance as well. There's a profound difference in EMS skill set between being exclusively a first response provider, where you're with the patient for a few minutes, and being a transport ambulance provider, where you're with the patient for a longer period of time. All of our providers rotate through these different roles day to day. EMS transport requires a deeper skill set and frequent utilization of second and even third tier interventions. Skills that atrophy without use and result in reduction of skills necessary when transport is not immediately available, or when they are required to assist the ambulance crew with patient care during transport. Patient advocacy. In our system, the transport ambulance crew is typically the first to arrive and make patient contact. They establish rapport with the patient. They talk to their family. They see their habitus, the environment within which they live, the external pressures under which they live, whether they be physical, social, emotional, or economic. These extenuating factors are passed on to the receiving physician to better understand the capacity of the patient to care for themselves, to be compliant with their medications, compliant with their discharge instructions. It informs the treating physicians of whether the patient has competent resources at home to rehabilitate or adequately care for themselves, or whether they need additional resources. This places us in a position where we can effectively advocate for the needs of the patient. One of the most profound and under-recognized advantages of fire-based transport is the luxury to determine right patient, right transport, right destination, right mechanism. We get paid for ambulance transport, and it is a portion of our revenue. However, unlike a third-party transport service, we are not totally dependent on transport revenue to exist. This allows us to ensure that it is in the patient's best interest to be seen at the ED, at the hospital, and which hospital is the most advantageous for the patient, for their condition. It allows us the latitude to determine if the patient is stable enough to go to another lesser resource entirely, a less comprehensive resource like an urgency care or a visit to their PCP instead, their primary physician. And if they do go to the hospital, whether the ambulance is the appropriate mechanism. Can they go by can their family take them? Can a neighbor take them? Do they have other means of getting there other than via our ambulance? Currently, we only transport about 65% of our EMS calls. The rest we determine to be sub-threshold for needing to be seen at a hospital ED, or we concur that with their decision to use alternative transportation. Third-party ambulance typically transports over 90% of the people who call 911. Essentially, if someone calls 911, they get a ride to the hospital in an ambulance. These are private, for-profit, publicly traded companies. This is their sole revenue source, and they rely on this revenue source to exist, and not only to exist, but to turn a profit and offer a return to their investors, despite the added economic burden to the patient and to the greater healthcare system. And in closing, in terms of our patient care, arriving first with the transport ambulance ensures short scene departure times. When the acuity of the patient deems emergent transport, where time is tissue, and any delay in transport results in additive injury or disability for the patient, we are fully positioned to grab the patient and run, performing any mitigating interventions en route. We don't have the delay of initial triage, of requesting an ambulance, of waiting for an ambulance or transfer of care when the ambulance arrives, of replacing our diagnostic and interventional equipment with that of the ambulance, or the ambulance crew adjusting to our equipment. All of this is doable. It is done by many agencies, but it takes time. And for many patients, time is the most valuable commodity. I've put at the bottom of the screen several testimonials, and the first one is from 2013, when Lynn Whitwer, the medical program director for Clark County, came and spoke in person to the city of Camas. And this is when we were going into the merger, and once again, talk of dismantling ambulance transport was in the air. And he said that dismantling, that in doing so, we would be dismantling the highest functioning EMS system in the region. And now it's 7 years later, and his opinion has not changed. In 2017, we contracted for an assessment of our EMS delivery system, and they summarized their findings by stating, after a comprehensive review, they found no compelling financial, operational, or other data to support eliminating the provision of emergency medical transport services by CWFD. This was again reiterated in 2019 in the master plan, where the contracted group, in doing their research, noted that CWFD EMS is highly regarded in the region for providing high quality patient care, that our providers are actively engaged in countywide education and research efforts, and have a vigorous field training program to ensure new paramedics are adequately vetted and trained. There should be no question at this point that Camas Ambulance is providing the best patient care of any of the models available to us. However, in addition to the high quality of patient care, which is our primary MO, ambulance transport benefits the city of Camas. And it does this through revenue, cost sharing, and efficiency. If we look at these revenues, these are revenues that would immediately be lost if the city of Camas did not offer transport capacity. Currently, East County Fire and Rescue has a pass-through levy, and Nick spoke to this earlier. And in exchange for that pass-through EMS levy, we provide transport to their constituents. And these are actuals from 2019. That was $463,000. Washougal is a little bit more complex because in 2014 we entered this ILA, and the ILA doesn't stipulate any amount of that that they contribute that is dedicated to EMS transport. However, prior to that ILA, and half of you will remember because you were here before then, but we had a three-party agreement where East County would give us their EMS levy in exchange for ambulance transport, and then Washougal would do the same. And so their EMS levy is $956K. So if Washougal were to pass through just their EMS levy, it would be almost $1 million a year. We also get ambulance billing revenue. In 2019, this was $1.38 million for that annual year. We also get GEMT income. Now that's ground emergency medical transport income, right? So that is defined for public transport alone. So a third party private ambulance transport would not be eligible for that. And this is money that we get from the federal government as issued by the state. So these revenues would be immediately lost. And even if we didn't transport, and even if you took the Washougal contribution out entirely, because much of that is rolled into the ILA, you're still talking about over $2 million a year. That's over 20% of our combined fire EMS budget. It also gives us an efficiency in utilizing existing resources. We are using our existing personnel, their existing skill set, the existing infrastructure of stations and management and oversight to provide a better level of service than could be achieved with having a largely redundant additional standalone agency to provide ambulance service. The revenue that performing this service brings in allows for additional staffing, more boots on the ground. These more boots on the ground augment our fire suppression capacity. Remember the geography. East Clark County is not geographically poised for quick mutual aid from any outside resource. We need the additional fire personnel that dual purpose personnel provides. Nick talked about the options that have been discussed just briefly for structural government and for structural governance, I should say, and a more stable financial platform. So of these, the first three are three that have already been discussed by council. They are the RFA fire district model, where we create an additional standalone entity different than what we have now. The second one is modifying the existing Washougal ILA cost allocation, essentially working within what we are currently utilizing, but making changes. And the third was terminating the Washougal ILA altogether, essentially going it alone. I'd like to just briefly introduce or plant the seed for a fourth option, which I've talked to several of the council members about, and that is a fee-for-service model. So what this would look like is East County Fire and Rescue would retain the current arrangement. They would give us as a pass-through their EMS levy, and we would provide transport to their constituents. For Washougal, we would morph the ILA into a fee-for-service contract. So they have openly stated, or at least a representative of their council has stated, that they are happy with the current level of service, which is 2 personnel on a transport ambulance and 2 personnel on a suppression engine in their response area. And we would essentially establish a contract for them for a dollar value on that level of service that we currently provide. They are happy with the current level of service. They are not willing to pay for a higher level of service at that time. And you were all included in the conversations about that. For Camas, this would give the city of Camas a stable and predictable partner revenue contribution. They would know from the value of that contract how much they're going to receive every year from Washougal. The East County EMS levy, is also very predictable. It would also give the city of Camas an independent level of service control. So if they wanted to change the level of service just within the city of Camas, for instance, addressing the cross-staffing at Station 42 or 3-person engine companies. Novak's finding about beefing up the fire marshal's office and the inspection programs. All of these things the city of Camas could decide to do for the city of Camas, and they would have an independent decision to do that. They would not have to pass that through the city of Washougal. It would not change the city of Washougal's contribution unless they were decide to change or revamp or increase the level of service and increase their fee-for-service contract. It's also in service to the long-term inevitability of a single East Clark County Fire and EMS Protection District. Now, when I say protection district, I don't mean that by the literal definition of a protected district, which is its own thing. I just mean of a single service that provides all fire, EMS, and ambulance transport to East Clark County. So in closing, I wanted to take my 10 minutes of time in the spotlight to take a step back, to widen the aperture, to create a broader understanding of the interdependence of the entities of Camas, Washougal, and East County Fire and Rescue. This dependence is not elective or out of convenience. It's forced on us by the geography of the area. We need to maintain ambulance transport, and we need to have a vision of the future, which is at some point a single entity responsible for fire, EMS, and ambulance transport for all of East Clark, for all of East Clark County. And every evolution we make to our current system needs to be in service or in view of that long-term vision. In closing, this is a mantra that I have on my desk that I think is especially apropos. I'm not here for me, I'm here for we, and we are here for them. And the them is all the constituents of Camas, of Washougal, and East County Fire and Rescue. And at this point, I will open it up to questions.
Fantastic, Cliff. Any questions for Cliff, or we have Nick back on as well from the council?
Mr. Mayor, it's Greg.
Absolutely, Greg.
Cliff, thank you. Chief, thank you. Digging into the element of the fee for service, I'm not trying to nitpick, I'm just trying to understand. When I look at the calls and the frequency of calls, and yet the fee for service is just based on boots serving Washougal, but yet many times I see units based in Camas responding into Washougal because of the dynamics of the needs of the community. How does that enter into that fee for service equation? If you can do it at a high level for dummies like me to understand.
So the fee for service would be based on giving them their existing level of service, but putting a price tag on it. And in that price tag needs to be obviously the personnel costs. It also needs to be a place to house those personnel, right? And then there needs to be a mechanism in there for growth, for an increasing call volume, because that's going to change over time, right? There also needs to be a piece that contributes to our apparatus maintenance and attrition, right? Because they are going to be using that. So the fee for service would essentially be an amount that equates to a term of that value for 3 to 5 years, probably. And then with pieces in it that require that to increase if certain tenants are met, if their call volume reaches a certain point, if it increases to a certain point. And that's currently how it is now, right? So we get their contribution, and then we still follow all of the county mutual aid agreements as established by the county, which is largely a borderless county. And we run where the calls are in whatever capacity we have to mitigate that call, which sometimes is more than the 2 or the 4 personnel that we currently have in their response area. So that wouldn't change between the 2 models. But what it would do would be effectively get the control back to the city of Camas to be able to make additional decisions about the level of service that Camas wants to see within the city of Camas without having to clear that and have that cost borne by ILA by Washougal. Does that make sense?
It does. I thank you. I just needed to have a bigger view of the definition of fee for service. Thank you.
I have a question that lends me to curiosity, and I'm glad that somebody's thinking outside the box. That's great. We need that. The challenge, though, is that whatever model we use, our neighbors are still challenged with being able to afford the level of service that we're providing today. To change the style or methodology seems to leave the result of the same challenge. We might call it a cost for service or fee for service, but I'm not grasping. If we're still sending the same number of people, the same number of calls, and it's based on our actual cost, does that make that more affordable for them?
Because it would cement is not the right word, but it would essentially put a cost value on the level of service that they are currently receiving, which is one that they have stated that they are happy with. And that would be their annual contribution. Now, when the city of Camas, because of the ILA and because of the cost sharing allocation, the city of Camas decides to make a change within the city of Camas, it increases Washougal's required contribution, which may not on a one-to-one level, dollar for dollar level, affect the response to the city of Washougal. It does make the system more robust. Extra boots on the ground does benefit Washougal, and it benefits ECFR too, because we are each other's mutual aid. We are the only resources available to each other, right? So it does benefit them, but not on a dollar for dollar scale that it does the city of Camas. Does that make sense?
Not really. I mean, I understand, I think your explanation, and I'm not trying to argue so much as get a grip on it. Maybe if I saw data and we talked more, I'd get it. I do know, if I could comment for other council, I had an engagement with Jamal. Jamal, was it a couple of weeks ago? I know he's diving into this deeply, and I'm at a point where I'm willing. I mean, here we are talking about a new idea, and we're probably using time that would be better spent until we know what Jamal comes up with. But I just got to tell you, after having that conversation with Jamal, I'm really optimistic. We're going to look for some good solutions, and he'll bring some options forward to us. So rather than spending a lot of time on it, I hope I didn't misstate that, Jamal. I just know you're doing a total deep dive, and credit to you, because I think we need that kind of counsel coming back from you and your partner in Washougal, and hopefully ECFR eventually, East County Fire and Rescue eventually. Just my comment. Thanks.
Could I just interject one thing too? This model is very similar to what our neighbors to the north do right now, battleground contracts with Fire District 3 for service. What the model, what that does is when you lock in a contract for a period of time, it provides that entity some surety over what they're going to be paying. And part of the problem was that we've been hearing from our neighbors to the east is that the volatility of it is really hard for them. They can't predict the next year what they're going to be paying. So this does help them as well as it helps us.
Thank you, Kathy. Any other questions for Cliff or Nick? Ellen?
Thank you for the presentations, Chief. I'm very excited to see that we're moving forward with the capital improvement plan and also discussing the strategic plan. That's great. And then, Cliff, this is really interesting, and I appreciate you taking, like Don said, some creative thinking here and then presenting it to really expanded for what it is. That it's this very large area with a lot of constraints that make it challenging to have solutions that fit. So I'm definitely interested in learning more about the fee for service, and I appreciate Kathy's comments about how this is working. This to me feels very similar to organizations I've been in on the private sector, where we had service organizations that contracted with business units to do work. And every year, in that case, the service was renegotiated and the costs updated. So as long as we have a mechanism to update those costs, because we know that they're accelerating, I'm definitely interested in exploring this more. My question is, yes, Washougal is happy with their level of service because the Camas Washougal Fire Department creates an amazing level of service. However, they may, to Don's point, not be able to afford that level of service. So just thinking about it is, how does a boot on the ground, they're not going to adjust their response because they're committed professionals. It's that balance. So that's where I'm curious, just during our conversations, perhaps today, perhaps in the future, how we frame that up. Thank you.
So let me throw in a question here. If on the fee for service, that would probably cover the cost of the Port of Camas, Washougal, where the port doesn't pay taxes for fire. But on the transport part, the fee for service would be covered. Am I right, Nick and Cliff? Those charges would be covered, or that expense of covering the port would be covered by the EMS part of it. But we still have to deal with the expansion they're going to have there, with a lot of people living on the waterfront and a lot of businesses being opened if they're on port property, right? And that would fall into Washougal's part of this pay for service contract.
I'd look to Cliff on that. That's not something that we had discussed as part of the port's part of this. I would presume that would perhaps, I mean, whatever is arrived at as far as negotiations with the city, as far as the fee, that could be rolled into that, I assume.
We are going to have more calls. We're going to have more activity in that port when that development goes in. So we're going to have to provide more service. Okay, well, anyway, I brought that part up. It sounds, Cliff, from the way you described the current operation of the EMS, that it is a money maker for our fire organization, let's call it that. It contributes. It not only covers its costs, it contributes. So what about expanding it? It sounds as if you've got Medic One, or excuse me, not Medic One, you've got the business of AMR that is providing a lower level of service, trying to make a profit for their shareholders. So they must be more expensive. If it expanded beyond our region, wouldn't that contribute more to us again?
Are you suggesting that Camas Ambulance takes over Clark County?
I'm suggesting that if we have a higher level of service and we actually are more efficient operationally in terms of cost, why wouldn't the whole county use that type of system? You're saying the Camas EMS department is doing it.
That is $1 million. That is $1 million question. Vancouver has threatened it due to their relationship with AMR in the past. Clark County Fire and Rescue and all of the small cities north of Vancouver have threatened to do this too, just because of their unhappiness with the performance of third-party transport. But it's a big undertaking, and as you know, it's an expensive undertaking, and it's a committing undertaking.
But it has been done in King County and in Pierce County.
Absolutely.
And, there's got to be a logic to it. And I've been driving towards costs and time lost and all these other issues. But if there is a profitability to it and it supports fire within the region, then the question that I can't get away from is, why doesn't it get expanded?
And if you look across the United States, I just read a paper on this in the last few weeks. 40% of transport is done by fire in the United States. Now, this paper was looking at other aspects of it, and they didn't define whether that's 40% by population density or 40% by geography. And those are two very different numbers, right? But this, we are not, I keep saying that we're unique, but we're unique to Clark County. We're not unique to the United States.
Correct.
This is the predominant mode because it's efficient, because it uses existing resources. It uses resources that are going to be there anyway, rather than introducing another redundant resource to do that same job with its own overhead and its own,
I know you don't like to hear this, Cliff, but the city of Camas owns it right now. It's the one efficient one in Clark County, and the city of Camas owns that EMS service. It's
Why don't I
shared
like
with
to hear that?
it's
I love
shared
to
with
hear
other-
that.
shared with other jurisdictions or fire districts, but it is one that we're the only ones that have control over in Clark County. And so anyway, food for thought, you guys. But I'd like to see the numbers that actually prove it. I believe it's true, but I'd like to see those numbers and have the council be able to analyze or review that. But we're the only ones that own it. And I will tell you, when I lived in Seattle, Medic One was awesome. And I know Nick was part of Medic One at one time.
In Thurston County, yes.
It's one hell of an organization. And we're the only city that has an opportunity to try to wake up the rest of Clark County as to how it could operate. Anyway, 2 cents. I'll mute myself again.
Any more questions?
Last time to get rid of it entirely. Now you're talking about expanding it. This is good conversation.
That's because I wanted the numbers.